Today on History's Tech, we are looking at the Martin B-57 Canberra. This 1950s American jet bomber was actually an authorized copy of the English Electric Canberra. Now, the B-57 has a long career with the United States spanning over 7 decades and continues to serve with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, to this day. But let's go ahead and look at the history of the B-57 Canberra. Now, the story of the B-57 actually starts with the Douglas A-26 Invader, which at the time was known as the B-26. And basically what happened is we get into the Korean War in the 1950s, and the United States Air Force found that it needed an all-weather interdiction aircraft. The B-26, that was known at the time, was just not meeting the capabilities of what they needed. It actually had a high rate of attrition, and the success of this type of aircraft was limited. So the Air Force requested a demonstration of the United Kingdom's brand new jet-powered bomber, the Canberra. Now, the United States actually had the opportunity to evaluate the aircraft, have some of their pilots test it, and they really liked it to the point that in September of 1950, the United States Air Force requested their own jet-powered bomber. They wanted it to have a top speed of 630 miles per hour. They needed a range of 1,100 miles. They also wanted it to have full all-weather capability and reconnaissance capabilities. Now, 3 American aircraft were brought forward for this request: the Martin XB-51, the North American B-45 Tornado, and the AJ Savage. And to expedite the process for the Korean War, they didn't allow any prototype aircraft or any aircraft that were only on paper. Instead, they wanted aircraft that were already existing, or at least the prototypes had been flown. And in a very unusual move, they went ahead and allowed foreign services to put in a bid. Avro Canada put in their CF-100, but initially English Electric did not submit their aircraft. They really didn't have an interest in it yet, as it had not officially entered service with the Royal Air Force even. But after some early tests of the first 4 aircraft, it was decided to go ahead and bring in Canberra because the American military really liked it, and they wanted it to be brought in so they could evaluate all 5 aircraft at the same time. So a singular airframe known as the Canberra B-2 was brought in for part of the evaluation process. Now, the 5 aircraft were pitted against each other in a series of different tests, and after the final evaluation, it was found that the Canberra was actually significantly superior to any of the competing aircraft, and it was selected because of those facts. Now, because it was a foreign-made aircraft, even though it was a superior aircraft, that didn't mean that the United States government was actually going to choose this. So what ended up happening is English Electric talked with Glenn L. Martin Company, and they proposed that Martin would receive a license to build the Canberra, and they would Americanize it to fit American standards for the U.S. military. So in 1951, Martin Corporation was given the contract to produce 250 Canberras, which the United States Air Force designated the B-57A. Now, due to the urgency of needing this airframe as quickly as possible, the United States decided to go ahead and abandon essentially the Americanization of the aircraft and basically produce the first B-57As as a copy of the Canberra B-2s. With the only exception of this being that they went ahead and went with their own engines, which were slightly more powerful. With the few changes made that they did do, the aircraft was finally ready for rollout, and its maiden flight in July of 1953. Now, only the first 8 aircraft actually rolled out as they should have been Canberra bombers. The remaining 67 B-57As were deemed no longer required as bombers and were actually converted on the assembly line to serve as medium-altitude reconnaissance aircraft while retaining all the basic Canberra features, but were redesignated the RB-57A. It wouldn't be until the B-57B that we actually get the bomber itself. Now, one final usage of the B-57A was that a single aircraft was converted with a new radar dome and used to track hurricanes. However, the United States decided it was time to go ahead and get their definitive bomber version, and this would be that B-57B. Now, quite a few changes were made to create the B-57B. They adopted a fighter-style canopy, accompanied by a flat panel windshield and a tandem seating arrangement to provide greater transparency and improved view for both the pilot and the navigator, also allowing it to be equipped with a gun sight. Speaking of gun sight, The aircraft added 4 hard points attached to the outer wing panels to allow it to mount a system of bombs or rockets. It was also furnished with a gun armament. The first 90 aircraft were actually produced to carry 850 caliber machine guns, with later ones being equipped with 420mm cannons. They replaced the bomb doors with a new rotary system that was supposed to be used on the XB-51. And this actually allowed them to close open the doors faster, reduce buffeting, improved accuracy, and allowed for faster attack speeds. And by June of 54, it was time for the B-57B to fly. However, it suffered from the exact same problem that failed the RB-57As, which is engine issues. And several were lost in high-speed, low-level operations due to faulty tailplane actuators. And the Air Force actually decided that the B-57 was inadequate for night fighter roles, and the aircraft had to go through extensive upgrades. And basically by 57, they were pretty much in the process to retire the aircraft already, this brand new bomber that had never seen action. However, the saving grace for the B-57 was actually the Vietnam War. The aircraft was first deployed in 1963 in early night operations. Later, the aircraft was modified for high-altitude strategic reconnaissance flights. With a series of avionics upgrades, including forward-looking infrared, new radar systems, the aircraft proved to be pretty decent at low-level bombing campaigns and night fighting. They were exceptionally well known for their ability to take out truck convoys along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now, while the aircraft was decently successful as a ground attack aircraft, it pretty much would only be utilized for those roles during the Vietnam War and would be retired from active combat roles after the war. And it was far more successful with the United States as a reconnaissance and electronic warfare aircraft instead, with the electronic warfare variant of the aircraft being retired by the United States Air Force in the 1980s to be replaced by the EF-111A Raven. And while that was the end of combat actions for the United States, it would actually see combat with the Pakistani Air Force, the only other Air Force to utilize the B-57 variant, where it would be utilized during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965 and the later Indo-Pakistani War of 1971, with the aircraft finally be retired by the Pakistani Air Force in the mid-1980s. Now, there are quite a few variants of the B-57, with most of them being some type of reconnaissance or electronic warfare variants. Now, some of these unique variants that are not reconnaissance include the B-57G, which was actually a modified version of a B-57B to include forward-looking infrared, LLTVs, laser designators in the nose, and this aircraft was designed specifically to use laser-guided bombs. And some of the major production variants of the aircraft for reconnaissance include the RB-57D, the RB-57F, and then my personal favorite, NASA's WB-57F. And of course, this is my favorite variant because I grew up down the road from Ellington Field, and this is the variant utilized by NASA at Johnson Space Center for Earth science research. So I grew up watching this particular series of aircraft fly around the Houston area as a child, and then later as an adult when I worked just down the road from Ellington Field, actually. So this was a rather unique experience for me, and there are actually 3 of this aircraft flying to this day. Now, if you don't have the opportunity to see one of the flying NASA variants, then you can still visit one. There are several dozen aircraft, including RB-57As, B-57Bs, EB-57Bs, 57Cs, E, all the way through several models that can be found around the United States in various air museums. But there you have it, a look at the B-57B Canberra, a U.S. bomber that technically had a very short career as a bomber, but had an incredibly long career as a reconnaissance aircraft, an electronics warfare vehicle, and a NASA research aircraft, which it still serves to this day. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.